Sunday mornings in Pine Creek always began the same way, with church bells echoing across the rolling Tennessee hills. The air smelled of dew and biscuits from Joe's Cafe. On Main Street, folks in pressed shirts and pastel dresses drifted toward the white steepled chapel that had stood for more than a century. In Pine Creek, Sunday didn't just belong to God. It belonged to Pastor Elijah Brooks. At 38, Elijah was the kind of man people pointed to when they spoke about a life led right. Tall, composed, with the steady voice of someone who believed every word he said. His sermons were simple but powerful, the kind that made you want to be better, even if just for a day. He'd grown up here, the only son of Mary Brooks, a quiet widow who raised him alone after her husband passed too soon. She'd worked at the diner, cleaned homes, saved every dime to send her boy to seminary. Now she sat proudly in the front pew every Sunday, small hands folded around a worn hymnal, eyes shining whenever her son spoke of faith and forgiveness. That morning, sunlight poured through the stained glass windows, scattering color across the wooden pews. Elijah stood behind the pulpit, his Bible open to the Gospel of John. "And you will know the truth," he read, pausing long enough for the room to hush, "and the truth will set you free." His voice carried through the church, low, deliberate, almost tender. For a moment, Pine Creek felt weightless. He looked down and caught his mother's gaze. She smiled, that soft, trembling smile only mothers have. In that instant, everything in Elijah's world felt perfectly aligned. God above, his mother below, and him standing between them, a bridge of faith. That day's sermon was about honesty, not the kind that wins you praise, but the kind that costs you something. He told a story about a farmer who found a calf wandering from the next pasture. Instead of returning it, he kept it, feeding it in secret. Every time he passed his neighbor's fence, he felt the sting of guilt. Truth, Elijah said, has its own way of knocking. It doesn't shout. It taps. A letter misplaced. A question we never meant to ask. The congregation nodded along, moved by his calm conviction. But up front, Mary lowered her eyes and clutched the edge of her shawl. Her knuckles turned white. After the service, people gathered around Elijah, just like always. A mechanic asked for prayers for his sick wife. A waitress thanked him for helping her brother with tuition. A teenage boy begged him to come watch their baseball game. Elijah promised them all he would. He always did. Mary waited at the church door, letting everyone else go first. When the crowd thinned, she stepped forward with a proud little smile. "You spoke beautifully today," she said. "That part about truth knocking, that was something." Elijah grinned. "Got that from you, Ma. You were always the storyteller." She laughed, brushing a stray gray curl from her cheek. "Lunch is ready, your favorite casserole. And I might have saved the last jar of Joe's peach preserves." He chuckled. "You know that's bribery, right?" "Only the kind the Lord forgives," she said, and they both laughed. That afternoon, Elijah fixed a leaky roof for an elderly couple down the road. He liked the quiet work, hammer, nail wood, and sky. Manual labor had always been a kind of prayer for him. When he finished, he waved off the envelope of cash they tried to give him. "Let God pay me back," he joked. By the time he reached his mother's house, the sun had tilted low. The Brooks home sat at the end of a gravel lane, wrapped in lavender and mint. Every summer of his childhood smelled like that. Mint leaves crushed in ice water, lavender drying on the porch. He parked his old truck, pushed open the creaky gate, and felt, as always, that he was crossing into a gentler world. The door was half open. Inside, the table was set, casserole golden brown, peach preserves glinting like sunlight in a jar. Mary emerged from the kitchen, spoon in hand. "You look tired," she said. "Roof work again?" "Just a couple of nails," Elijah said, washing his hands at the sink. "You spoil me, you know that? It's my right as your mother." He smiled, pulling out a chair. "You've earned it." They ate slowly, talking about the kids at church, about the garden, about everything and nothing. The afternoon light spilled through the window, painting soft gold across the table. Mary's voice carried a warmth that seemed timeless. Then, out of nowhere, Elijah said quietly, "Mom, if one day the truth hurt, would it still be worth knowing?" She looked up puzzled. What do you mean, honey? He hesitated, shaking his head. Nothing. Just a thought from the sermon. She reached across the table, patting his hand. The truth always matters, she said gently. Even when it hurts. Outside, the wind brushed through the chime, made of seashells hanging on the porch. Its faint notes trembled in the air, soft, uncertain, like a warning whispered too quietly to hear. Elijah finished his meal, promised to fix her cabinet hinge the next day, and headed out into the fading light. Behind him, the house stood still and peaceful. But somewhere in that quiet, truth was already knocking, a small, patient sound that would soon split their world in two. The summer storm rolled in fast that night, one of those Tennessee tempests that could turn a calm evening into chaos in minutes. The rain hit the roof of Mary Brooks's little house like a drumbeat, steady and relentless. Elijah was there to fix the cabinet hinge he'd promised, but when the ceiling began to leak near the hallway, Mary handed him a flashlight and said, "The patch kit's up in the attic, sweetheart. You know where it is." Elijah climbed the narrow wooden ladder, the flashlight beam cutting through years of dust and cobweb. The air up there was warm, thick with the smell of old paper and cedar. Boxes stacked neatly along the beams. Some marked Christmas, books, baby clothes. He crouched to reach the corner where the patch kit should have been. His light swept over something else instead. A small metal box, dented and locked with an old clasp. On the lid, faintly scratched, were the initials M.H. "M.H.," he murmured. His mother's maiden name was Harper, wasn't it? The thought stuck for a second, then curiosity took over. He carried it down the ladder. Mary was in the kitchen, towel over her shoulder, humming softly while stirring soup. Elijah set the box on the counter. "Hey, Ma, what's this?" "It's got your initials, I think." The moment she turned, the hum stopped. Her eyes darted to the box, and something, panic, maybe, flashed across her face. "Oh, that old thing? Just some papers. Don't worry about it." Her tone was too quick, too tight. Elijah frowned. "Mind if I take a look? Maybe it's something important." "Elijah," she said sharply, "leave it be." He froze, surprised at the edge in her voice. His mother had never raised her voice to him, not once. But before he could reply, she softened again. "It's just memories I'd rather not open. Please." They patched the ceiling in silence. Rain pounded harder, thunder rolling like judgment in the distance. But Elijah couldn't stop glancing at that little box sitting on the counter. After Mary went to bed, he lingered in the kitchen. He told himself he was just checking, making sure it wasn't something valuable that needed safekeeping. He unlatched the clasp. The metal groaned softly. Inside, a stack of faded papers tied with a ribbon, a small photo album, and a folded military discharge form. The name at the top read, Martin Hayes. Elijah blinked. It wasn't familiar, but the photo, tucked beside it, made his stomach tighten. It was a younger version of his mother, or someone who looked just like her, dressed in an army uniform. Only, it wasn't quite her. The jaw was stronger, the hair shorter, the body unmistakably male. He unfolded the documents with shaking hands. A certificate of gender reassignment surgery, dated 1987. A hospital letter confirming a name change from Martin Hayes to Mary Brooks. And at the bottom, a signed adoption paper, his name written there, Elijah Brooks. The room swayed. His breath came shallow and fast. He read it twice, 3 times, each time hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something else. But they didn't. His mother, his entire life, had been built on a secret. When Mary walked into the kitchen moments later, she saw the open box and went pale. "Elijah, no." He turned toward her, eyes wide and wet. "Who is Martin Hayes?" Her lips trembled. She reached for the counter to steady herself. "Please, son, let me explain." "Explain what?" His voice cracked. "That my mother was never really my mother? That you've lied to me for 38 years. Mary took a shaky step closer. "I am your mother, Elijah. I always have been. I did what I had to do to have a life. To have you. You lied about everything," he whispered. "About Dad, about—" "Your father knew," she said softly. "He loved me. We both wanted you. The rest didn't matter. But to Elijah, everything mattered. Every sermon he'd ever preached about truth, Every verse he'd quoted about sin and deceit now echoed like thunder in his skull. He felt betrayed by the very person who'd taught him to pray. "You pretended to be something you're not," he said, voice trembling. Mary's eyes glistened with tears. "No, Elijah. I became who I was meant to be. That's not pretending. That's surviving." He couldn't answer, couldn't look at her. He backed away, the papers clutched in his hand like proof of a crime. "I need to go. Elijah, please." But he was already out the door, rain slamming down like stones, the thunder swallowing her voice. He drove with no destination, the windshield wipers blurring the world. The words Martin Hayes flashed in his mind again and again, each time sharper, crueler. By the time he pulled into the church parking lot and sat there in the dark, Elijah felt something inside him crack open, a rift between faith and flesh, love and truth. And from that night forward, the man Pine Creek had trusted most began to unravel in silence. By the following Sunday, the summer heat had settled over Pine Creek like a heavy blanket. The church windows stood wide open, but the air inside still felt stifling, thick, uneasy. When Pastor Elijah Brooks stepped to the pulpit, something in him was different. His suit was still pressed, his Bible still open, but his eyes, the calm, steady eyes people trusted, had a flicker in them now, a restlessness. He began his sermon not with a story, but with a question. How much sin can hide in a home before the walls start to crack? People shifted in their seats. Elijah's voice, usually soft and deliberate, came sharper now, each word like a nail driven into wood. He spoke of deceit, of wolves in sheep's clothing, of souls living in disguise before God. Some lies, he said, his knuckles whitening around the pulpit, aren't told in words, but in the very way we choose to live. Mary was there, as always, sitting in the front pew. But this time she couldn't lift her eyes. Every sentence sounded like it was meant for her, and in a way it was. Elijah quoted scripture after scripture, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Romans. Verses that condemned deception, impurity, and the confusion of creation. His voice rose, trembling with something between conviction and rage. To the congregation, it was strange, almost frightening. To his mother, it was unbearable. When the service ended, people filed out quietly. Some offered awkward smiles. Others avoided his gaze. No one asked about the change in tone, but everyone felt it. The man who had once preached compassion now sounded like he was preaching war. Mary waited until the crowd was gone. She approached him slowly, as if walking toward an open flame. "Elijah," she said gently, "your sermon, it sounded so angry." He closed the Bible with a snap. "It's the truth, Mother. Sometimes truth has to burn." She sighed, her voice trembling. "But it isn't supposed to burn you." He turned away, jaw tight. "Do you know what it's like to realize everything you believed in was built on a lie?" Mary's lips quivered. "You think I lied to hurt you? I lied to have you. I wanted you to grow up free from shame." Elijah let out a bitter laugh. "Free? You made me a preacher, Ma. You made me stand up every Sunday and preach purity while my own home was built on deceit." Tears welled in her eyes. "I never meant for you to find out that way." He stared at her, not seeing his mother, but the ghost of someone else. Someone named Martin Hayes. The man in the photo. The stranger in his childhood home. From that day on, Elijah changed. His congregation felt it first. The unease in his messages, the way his kindness turned to judgment, the way he seemed to see sin everywhere he looked. His hands shook when he held the Bible. His prayers grew longer, darker, filled with pleas for purity of the house. At night, neighbors sometimes heard him praying aloud through the walls, pacing, crying, arguing with someone who wasn't there. Mary, desperate to reach him, tried cooking his favorite meals, leaving little notes on his porch. "You are loved. Come home for supper." But he didn't answer. She went to the church one afternoon and found him scrubbing the altar with bleach, the smell so strong it burned her eyes. "Elijah," she said, coughing, "what are you doing?" "Cleansing," he whispered. "There's filth everywhere, even here." She took a step forward. "Son, listen to me. God doesn't want you to cleanse the world. He wants you to love it." He froze, staring down at the floor, breathing hard. For a long moment, she thought he might cry. But then he straightened, voice flat. Maybe he doesn't want you to love lies anymore. That night, Elijah sat alone in the empty church, staring at the crucifix above the pulpit. The candles flickered. His reflection shimmered faintly in the glass window, tired, hollow, and frightened. He whispered a prayer, not for forgiveness, but for clarity. Lord, if there is evil in my house, show me the way to drive it out. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance again, rolling across the Tennessee hills. And in a small lavender-scented house at the edge of town, Mary Brooks sat by the window, watching the storm, clutching a photograph of her son at his ordination day. She whispered a prayer of her own, one she'd never said aloud. Please, God, protect him from himself. The night it happened, Pine Creek was wrapped in silence. Even the cicadas seemed to hold their breath. The air was heavy, swollen, with the kind of humidity that makes the sky feel too close. Inside her small house on Lavender Lane, Mary Brooks stood in the kitchen, lighting candles one by one. The power had flickered out an hour earlier after a short summer storm. She didn't mind the darkness. She'd always found candlelight comforting, gentle. She set the table for two, just as she had done every Sunday evening for years. Casserole, fresh bread, peach preserves, Elijah's favorites. He hadn't answered her calls for 3 days. Not since that last sermon, the one where his words sliced through her like blades. She told herself he just needed time. He'll come home, she whispered, placing the silverware down. He always comes home. And then she heard the sound, his truck crunching over the gravel drive. Her heart lifted. She hurried to the door, wiping her hands on a towel, smiling before she saw his face. But when he stepped into the doorway, soaked in rain and shadow, the smile froze. Elijah, she breathed. You came. He didn't answer. His eyes were distant, unfocused, as if he'd driven there on instinct rather than choice. You're drenched, she said softly, reaching for his jacket. Let me. He stepped back. Leave it. The tone chilled her. She'd heard that voice only once before, the day his father died, when grief hardened into something unreadable. They sat across from each other at the small table, the candle flames dancing between them. The only sounds were the rain dripping from the roof and the slow tick of the kitchen clock. Mary finally spoke. I've been praying for you. He looked up, eyes hollow. Then pray harder. Her hand trembled as she reached for the preserves jar. You're angry. I understand. But Elijah, what I did, it wasn't evil. It was survival. Back then, people like me didn't get to live. I just wanted to be someone good. To be a mother. He flinched at the word mother. Stop saying that. That's what I am, she said gently. You're my son. His chair scraped back suddenly. No, you're not my mother. You're a lie that wore her skin. The words cracked through the room. Mary's breath caught. Elijah, you raised me on truth, on purity, on the word of God. And all that time, he couldn't even finish. His chest rose and fell, trembling with fury and heartbreak. You made me believe in a world that never existed. Tears spilled down her face. The world existed because I built it for you. Because I loved you. Love me. He laughed bitterly. You play God. You changed what he made and called it love. Mary rose slowly, stepping toward him. If God made me wrong, Elijah, then why did he give me you? The question hung in the air like smoke. For a moment, he froze. Something flickered in his eyes, pain, maybe, or confusion. But then it twisted into something darker. I prayed, he whispered, voice breaking. I asked him what to do. He told me I had to cleanse what's been corrupted. Mary shook her head, backing up now, hands raised as if facing a wild animal. No, Elijah, please don't do this. He reached for the counter, where the kitchen knife gleamed in the candlelight. Son, I'm not your son, he said, almost softly. I'm his servant. He stepped forward, the blade trembling in his hand. Mary's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't run. She reached out, like she had when he was a boy with nightmares. You don't need to do this. The truth doesn't need blood to live. Elijah, look at me, she whispered. You're still my boy. Always. He hesitated. His lip quivered. The candles flickered, throwing shadows across his face. For an instant, He looked lost again, a child in a storm. Then something snapped. He moved fast, a blur of pain and faith twisted together. The struggle lasted seconds. A cry, a crash, the sound of glass shattering. When it was over, Mary lay crumpled on the floor, her hands still reaching toward him, her fingertips stained red. Elijah stood over her, chest heaving, the knife clattering from his grasp. For a long time he just stared at the blood, the candles, the peach preserves spilled like amber on the floor. He knelt beside her, touching her hair, whispering broken words. "Forgive me, Ma, forgive me." But the house stayed silent. Only the wind moved through the lavender outside, carrying the faint smell of rain and iron. Elijah pressed his palms together, tears streaking his face. "I did what you asked," he whispered toward the ceiling. "I cleansed my home." Then he bowed his head beside her body and began to pray. When the storm passed, Pine Creek slept peacefully under the washed-out moon, unaware that its most beloved pastor had just committed an act that would divide the town, the church, and the nation for years to come. Morning light crept across Pine Creek, spilling over the rooftops and pastures. The storm had left the streets damp and shining, everything washed clean, everything except the Brooks house. At 7:16 a.m., a call came into the Pine Creek Sheriff's Office. A neighbor, Mrs. Ruth Danner, said she saw Pastor Elijah's truck parked outside all night. "It's not like him," she said, and his mother's doors wide open. When Deputy Collins arrived, he found the house silent except for the faint hum of a refrigerator and the slow drip of rain from the roof. He called out twice. No answer. In the kitchen, the candle wax had hardened into pale puddles across the table. The peach preserves jar lay shattered on the floor. And near the counter, a body, Mary Brooks, 68 years old. Her hands still curled inward as if reaching for something. There was blood, but not chaos, a strange, tragic order to it, like a ritual that had gone wrong. Within the hour, the place swarmed with investigators. Yellow tape stretched across the yard. Reporters would later describe it as the day Pine Creek lost its soul. Detective Hannah Crow, a seasoned investigator from the county, took one look around the kitchen and knew it wasn't a robbery. The front door showed no forced entry. Nothing valuable missing. Whoever did this, she knew him. Then she saw the Bible on the table, open to John 8, verse 32. "And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Crow exhaled slowly. He quoted that in last Sunday's sermon, a parishioner later told her. They found Elijah hours later, sitting alone in the church sanctuary. His hands were still stained red. The knife lay neatly beside him on the altar. When Crow entered, he didn't look up. He was whispering, words that at first she couldn't catch. Then she realized he was praying. "Elijah," she said softly, approaching. "You need to come with me." He nodded once, like he'd been expecting her. "I did what was asked of me," he murmured. The truth needed to be set free. At the station, he gave a full confession, calm, almost peaceful. He spoke of lies, of sin, of how darkness had lived in his home. When asked why he killed his mother, he said, "Because she was never truly my mother. She deceived God." Crow stared at him for a long moment before replying. Or maybe she was just trying to survive in his world. Elijah didn't answer. He just lowered his head and whispered another prayer. The autopsy results came 2 days later. The pathologist, Dr. Bernard Ellis, called Crow personally. "You're going to want to sit down for this," he said. Mary Brooks, legal name Mary Harper Brooks, had been born male. Her medical records confirmed a full gender transition in 1987. Crow leaned back in her chair, the gravity of it sinking in. "Does the son know?" "He knew," Ellis said quietly. "He's the one who told us. Said he found out last week." The revelation hit Pine Creek like a bomb. The town split overnight. Some called Elijah a victim of deception. Others called him a murderer driven by hate. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, half waving signs that read, "Truth and faith matter." The other half holding candles and posters that said, "Love has no gender." Reporters from Nashville, even Atlanta, descended on the small Tennessee town that had suddenly become a national headline. Pastor kills mother after discovering she was born a man. Detective Crow watched the media frenzy and felt sick. She'd spent her career chasing greed, revenge, crimes of passion, but this was different. This was a collision of love and belief, truth and fear. When she sat down again with Elijah for a follow-up interview, she studied him carefully. He looked thinner, pale, but his voice was steady. "I freed her," he said. "Now her soul is clean." Crow leaned forward. "You didn't free her, Elijah. You silenced her. There's a difference." For the first time, his expression cracked. "She lied to me my whole life. She protected you," Crow said quietly. "You just couldn't forgive her for being human." He turned away, eyes glistening. "God doesn't make mistakes." "No," Crow said softly, "but people do, and sometimes they're worth forgiving anyway." That night, Crow stood outside the small Lavender house one last time. The wind carried the faint scent of mint and rain. The candles from the night of the murder had been collected as evidence, but their smoke stains still marked the table. She looked at the open Bible, still tagged with that verse. She thought about Mary's quiet life, the decades she spent hiding in plain sight, and the son who'd loved her enough to destroy her. Two truths, she realized, can live in the same house. And sometimes they kill each other. The trial of state of Tennessee versus Elijah Brooks began 6 months after the murder, but the tension in Pine Creek had never cooled. News vans lined the courthouse steps. Protesters stood on both sides of the street, one group holding Bibles and truth above all signs, the other waving rainbow flags and candles. The small-town courtroom had become the stage for America's oldest argument, faith versus identity. Inside, Elijah sat at the defense table in a wrinkled suit, his wrists chained loosely in front of him. His face was thinner now, the confident gleam from the pulpit long gone. He stared ahead as Judge Milton Harper called the court to order. The prosecution began with stark simplicity. "Ladies and gentlemen," District Attorney Monica Hale said, pacing before the jury, "this man brutally killed his own mother, a woman who loved him, raised him, and sacrificed everything for him. He didn't act in self-defense. He acted out of hate, out of pride, out of judgment." She paused, letting the words hang. "He claimed it was God's will. But no God commands the killing of a mother." In the gallery, Mary's photo rested on the prosecution's table, her soft smile framed by the flickering camera flashes from reporters. Then came the defense. "Elijah Brooks," Attorney Mark Ridley began, "is not a monster. He's a man who suffered a catastrophic psychological break, triggered by a revelation that shattered his entire belief system." Ridley turned toward the jury, voice gentle. "Imagine learning that everything you built your life on, every sermon, every moral, was suddenly turned upside down." His mind didn't know how to reconcile faith and betrayal. It broke. "That's not evil. That's human." Elijah didn't look up. He just kept rubbing his palms together, whispering silent prayers. The first week brought witness after witness. Congregation members testified about Elijah's change in tone during sermons. Mrs. Danner described hearing arguments between him and his mother. Detective Hannah Crow took the stand, recounting the calm confession she'd heard. He said, "I did what was asked of me." He believed God told him to cleanse his home. When the defense called their star witness, the courtroom fell silent. Dr. Samuel Carter, a forensic psychiatrist from Vanderbilt University, stepped up. He explained how Elijah's rigid upbringing and lifelong immersion in doctrine left him psychologically fragile, unable to process moral contradictions. His faith was his identity, Carter said. When that faith was shaken by his mother's secret, he experienced what we call a religious delusion of purification. He believed killing her would restore divine order. "Are you saying he's insane?" the prosecutor asked. Carter nodded slightly. Not legally insane, he knew what he was doing, but he believed it was holy, and that belief removed the barrier between morality and violence. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The judge banged his gavel. The prosecution countered with evidence. The crime scene photos, the autopsy, the handwritten note found in Elijah's study. Truth demands cleansing. The blood will wash away the lie. D.A. Hale read it aloud, then turned to the jury. "That's not confusion. That's conviction." She glanced toward the defendant. He wasn't protecting his faith. He was protecting his pride. Elijah flinched, eyes flickering upward for the first time. Midway through the trial, a moment stunned everyone. The defense played a short recording recovered from Mary's phone, a voicemail she'd sent to Elijah the night before she died. "Elijah, it's Mom. I know you're angry, but I love you, son. You were never a mistake, and neither was I." For the first time, Elijah broke down in tears, not silent tears, but raw, shaking sobs. The courtroom froze. Even D.A. Hale paused, her lips pressing tight. The judge allowed a recess. Outside, reporters swarmed, capturing the sound bites that would dominate national headlines. The pastor cries in court. Love and faith collide in Pine Creek. When Elijah returned to the stand, his voice was hoarse. "I loved her," he said, "but I thought love meant truth. I thought truth meant obedience. I thought obedience meant doing what he wanted." "Who told you what he wanted?" the defense asked gently. Elijah looked up, eyes red. "No one. I just heard it in my head in my prayers. It was so loud." He paused, trembling. "And now, I don't hear anything at all." The courtroom was silent except for the hum of cameras. Closing arguments were emotional chaos. The prosecution painted Elijah as a man too proud to accept imperfection. The defense portrayed him as a man destroyed by faith, not driven by hate. When the jury went to deliberate, Pine Creek held its breath. Protesters outside lit candles as the sun went down, their chants mixing with the sound of church bells in the distance. After 9 hours, the jury returned. The foreman stood, voice steady. "We find the defendant, Elijah Brooks, guilty of second-degree murder." A gasp rippled through the room. Half relief, half heartbreak. Elijah bowed his head. He didn't cry. He just whispered one line. "Then let his will be done." As deputies led him away, Detective Crow watched from the back row. Reporters shouted, flashbulbs burst, and she thought of that Bible verse again. "The truth will set you free." But as Elijah disappeared behind the courtroom doors, she realized something chilling. Sometimes, the truth doesn't set you free at all. Sometimes, it just leaves you with nothing left to believe in. The sentencing took place on a gray November morning. Pine Creek looked washed out, like the color had drained from its hills and steeples. The courthouse steps were slick with rain, and yet the crowd still gathered. Reporters clutching umbrellas, townspeople standing in stunned clusters, protesters holding faded signs now blurred by water. Inside the courtroom, Elijah Brooks sat at the defendant's table wearing an orange jumpsuit beneath a dark blazer someone had loaned him. His once steady hands now trembled faintly on the table. Across the aisle, the prosecutor read her final statement. "This community lost a woman who lived quietly, who harmed no one, who gave her whole life to love her son. Justice demands acknowledgement of that loss." When it was his turn to speak, Elijah rose slowly. His voice came out rough, quieter than anyone had ever heard it. "I took something I can't give back," he said. "I thought I was following God. But now, every time I close my eyes, I only see her, smiling, forgiving me even as I sinned." A long silence followed. The judge's face softened, but his tone stayed firm. "Faith cannot excuse the taking of a life," he said. "The law recognizes remorse, but it also recognizes choice." When the gavel fell, Elijah was sentenced to 20 years in prison for second-degree murder. A collective breath escaped the room, half grief, half relief. Outside, the storm clouds finally broke, sunlight slipping through for the first time that day. Some called it mercy. Others called it irony. Mary Brooks was buried 3 days later in the small cemetery behind Pine Creek Chapel. Her headstone was simple, white marble, etched with both names. Mary Martin Brooks, 1955 to 2023, beloved parent, child of God, seeker of truth. Only a few people came: Detective Hannah Crow, Mrs. Ruth Danner, 2 neighbors from church, and a handful of townsfolk who hadn't been able to make sense of anything since the arrest. Crow placed a small bouquet of lavender and mint at the base of the headstone. The scent carried in the wind, faint and sweet, mixing with the earthy smell of rain. She whispered, "You try to live honestly, even when honesty wasn't safe." Reporters didn't bother showing up that day. The headlines had already moved on. National debates about gender, faith, and the pastor who killed for God. Pine Creek wanted the noise to stop. It wanted to forget. But forgetting wasn't easy. The church stayed open, though attendance dropped by half. Some parishioners said they felt betrayed. Others claimed Elijah's downfall was a test of faith. One old deacon muttered, "He preached too close to fire and got burned." The Lavender House at the end of the lane was boarded up, sold quietly by the state. Kids riding their bikes slowed down when they passed it, whispering about the haunted preacher house. And every Sunday, when the church bell rang, people still looked at the empty pulpit and wondered how a man who once spoke of love could end in such darkness. Months later, Detective Crow drove to the state penitentiary to deliver paperwork related to the appeal. She found Elijah in the chapel, a bare room with folding chairs and a small cross on the wall. He was thinner, his hair grayer, but his eyes were strangely calm. He spent his days teaching Bible study to inmates, writing letters no one ever answered. "Do you believe she forgives you?" Crow asked quietly. Elijah looked at the cross, then back at her. "I think she forgave me before I did it." Crow nodded slowly. "You know, some people still think you were right, that you acted in faith." He gave a sad smile. Faith without love isn't faith. It's fire. When she left, he stayed behind, kneeling in front of the cross, whispering something she couldn't hear. Outside, the wind picked up again, the same kind that used to rattle the chimes on his mother's porch. It carried through the prison yard, past the barbed wire, out toward Pine Creek, where the lavender fields were blooming again. In a town once built on sermons about truth, silence had become the new language. And though Mary Brooks was gone, her final words still seemed to linger in the air. The truth doesn't need blood to live. The prison chapel at Coldwater Correctional wasn't much to look at. A plain concrete room with folding chairs, a scuffed wooden cross, and a single window covered by wire mesh. But to Elijah Brooks, it was the only place that still felt like air. He'd been there for 3 years now. The headlines had faded, the protests long gone, but inside those walls, the story never really ended. Some inmates still called him Preacher Man. Others kept their distance, unsure if he was holy or haunted. Maybe he was both. Every morning at dawn, Elijah sat in the chapel before anyone else arrived. He'd open the same Bible he once preached from, the one stained at the corners with his mother's handwriting. In a margin beside John 8, verse 32, she had once written in faint ink, "The truth doesn't need to hurt to be real." He read that line over and over until the words blurred. Over time, he began leading small prayer circles for other inmates, men who'd killed in anger, in fear, in desperation. He didn't preach anymore. He listened. They came to him for counsel, but often he found himself learning more from them. One inmate, a quiet lifer named Cruz, told him, "You talk about forgiveness like it's something you give away. It's not. It's something you live with every day until it stops cutting." That night, Elijah couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, thinking about his mother's last words, "You're still my boy." For months after the trial, he couldn't bring himself to say her name. But eventually, he started writing her letters, pages and pages he could never send. "Dear Mom, I used to think I killed you because of God. But now I think I killed you because I was too weak to love someone I didn't understand. I thought truth and purity were the same thing. They're not. Truth is what's left when purity dies and you have to face what's still standing." He folded each letter carefully and tucked it inside a small tin box the prison chaplain had given him. A box that looked eerily like the one he'd once opened in the attic, the one that had destroyed everything. Only this time, the box didn't hold secrets. It held confessions. In the spring of his 5th year, Elijah received an unexpected visitor. Detective Hannah Crow, older now, hair streaked with gray, stood in the visitation room holding a folder. "I'm not here for a case," she said. "I just wanted you to know something." She slid the folder across the table. Inside was a letter, yellowed, edges worn. It had been found in one of Mary Brooks's old hymnals, tucked between the pages. It was addressed to Elijah. He read slowly, his hands trembling. "My dear son, If you ever find this, it means the truth came for us sooner than I hoped. I wanted to tell you myself, not to ask forgiveness, but to help you understand that the person you love has always been real. You don't have to choose between me and God. Maybe we're both part of the same truth. Love, Mom. Elijah's throat tightened. He pressed the paper to his forehead, tears streaking his cheeks. She wanted you to find that, Crow said softly. Maybe not the way it happened, but she wanted you to know she never stopped loving you. He nodded, unable to speak. Years passed quietly. Elijah aged into a man with silver at his temples and a gentleness that surprised even the guards. He started a writing class for inmates, letters to their families, essays about regret, prayers rewritten as poems. When asked why he did it, he said, because confession doesn't end when the words do. It ends when you learn to listen. Sometimes, on clear mornings, he would sit by the barred window, feeling the warmth of sunlight on his hands, and imagine the lavender fields of Pine Creek swaying in the wind. He'd picture his mother there, not the way she died, but the way she lived, humming in the kitchen, setting the table, lighting candles that glowed against the dusk. He whispered to the empty room, I understand now. On the 10th anniversary of Mary's death, the prison chaplain held a small memorial service. Only a handful attended, inmates, 2 guards, and Elijah himself. He stood at the front, reading the verse that had once defined his downfall. And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Then he looked up and smiled faintly. But freedom isn't leaving a place. It's finally stopping the fight inside yourself. When the service ended, he stayed behind, hands clasped, eyes closed. The chaplain found him still kneeling long after everyone else had gone, tears on his face, lips moving silently in prayer. That night, as the prison settled into darkness, a breeze slipped through the chapel window. It rustled the pages of Elijah's Bible until it stopped on that same verse again. The candle beside it flickered, casting a soft glow over the words. And over the photo he kept tucked there, Mary, smiling, holding a much younger Elijah in her arms. For the first time in years, he slept without dreams. And in the silence of Coldwater Prison, where redemption often comes too late, one man finally learned that the truth doesn't always set you free, but it can make peace with the part of you that still believes.